Well, first, when people think about foreign policy and U.S. foreign policy, they don't automatically think of lobbyists in the smoke-filled rooms inside the Beltway, right? They think of what's supposed to represent the U.S. national interest. But of course, it's political, and like all creatures of the political process in a democracy like the U.S., you have lobbyists. And the groups that people hear about and talk about are the groups that often are traditional interest groups. They have one narrow interest in mind. They're the American Israel Political Action Group, a group that's focused on one thing. So unions, sometimes defense contractors, the kind of masters of war, the people who want to build airplanes, but maybe universities that have a big say in foreign students and exchanges like that. They're doing some of this lobbying. And if you look at the total number of lobbying filings, it kind of fits that picture. About half of the Lobbyist Disclosure Act filings where people say, yep, we're spending money lobbying Washington, D.C., are groups like that. Interest groups, unions, just ideological groups like Greenpeace. But if you look at the money, that's dwarfed. Actually, if you look at the money that's spent lobbying Washington, D.C., 80% of the money comes from private interests, from either big public corporations, private corporations, or these large trade associations like the Pharmaceutical Research Association or the Chamber of Commerce. And so really, it's not this full panoply that represents the broad interests of the American public. It's companies, and especially big companies, who are the big lobbyists in foreign policy. Well, I think for a long time people have talked about the important roles of corporations in influencing foreign policy, but they've looked through the route of campaign contributions, and that's really important. Groups who want to affect policy have a lot of weapons that they use. One of them is PAC contributions to try to help open the doors up in Capitol Hill. But what it turns out is that by far the vast majority of the money goes into lobbying, right? Once you open up the doors, you got to have someone to knock on that door. You got to have this phalanx of lobbyists to watch all these bills and really plead your case. And so really the campaign finance data, which has been studied because the data are available, that's the tip. The iceberg is the lobbying dollars. Almost 10 times as much money spent in lobbying in the realm of foreign policy as there are in campaign contributions. So that's really where we want to focus people's attention. So about half the money that comes from lobbying foreign policy, especially from these large corporations, is on political economy, things like trade and international finance regulations, things that are truly going to affect the bottom line of these companies who want to sort of open up new markets where they want to sell things and also create barriers to entry for their competitors. That's trade and aid is where they're spending a lot of their money. And then you do see a good amount of money, about a quarter of the money goes into security issues, especially defense contractors and the folks who need the world to be sort of safe and working well to do, say, resource extraction in developing nations. I'm an American political scientist, and my co-authors on this project, Emily Hafner-Burden, who does international relations, so she's worried about how this policy actually shapes out in the world, and David Victor is an international political economist working at these the ways in which market inequalities translate into political inequalities. We're talking about this in sort of all three of our interests combined, and also created these normative concerns with, so if all this money is pouring into foreign policy and to some extent shaping American foreign policy, who's spending it? Does it reflect the broad interest of the American public? And is sort of something going wrong in our lobbying and foreign policy system?